South Africa has hit back at the accusations by the US that a Russian ship had collected weapons from a naval base near Cape Town late last year. The US ambassador to South Africa, Reuben Brigety, said on Thursday he was confident that a Russian ship under US sanctions took aboard weapons from the Simonstown base in December, suggesting the transfer was not in line with Pretoria's stance of neutrality in Russia's war against Ukraine. Well, for more analysis on this, we're very pleased to be joined by security analyst and consultant, Mr. Andy Grudko. Andy, a very good evening to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, what do you think is the possible diplomatic fallout from this debacle? Some investors fear this could, of course, lead Washington to try and impose some sanctions, Andy.
Yeah, good evening, Alicia, and good evening to your viewers. Well, that is a very real threat, of course. The Americans are quite determined to support the Ukrainians in this present conflict, and they have made quite strident objections to people assisting the Russians, and we have considerable investments, I believe, in the region of possibly 2, maybe even 400 billion rands of potential investments that could be hanging on a thread should we fall out of favor with the Americans.
But Andy, I mean, wouldn't you then say, honestly, we all know, it's public knowledge that the US has, of course, been funding Ukraine in both military as well as monetary assistance to the tune of billions of dollars. This is not secret. Surely it's a bit disingenuous of them to then start threatening South Africa with sanctions when they are themselves heavily involved in this saga.
Yeah, well, of course, the Americans... They do like to control things as much as they can. They still consider themselves to be the world's superpower. Arguably, they probably still are at the moment, although they see Russia and the rise of China as possibly impinging on those. There's also a dynamic which South Africans might not think of or might not even be aware of, which is that there's a schism in America, a growing schism between the political left and the political right. The supporters effectively of Biden and then the supporters of presumably Trump in 2024, where for some reason the American right seem to be very pro the Russian stance. They are believing the Russians' rationale for their invasion, saying that they are denazifying and supporting democracy in the Ukraine. And these more right-wing inclined Americans are very, very vocal, in fact, probably more vocal than the left-wing Americans.
And then, Andy, from a security standpoint, what are then the probabilities of South Africa supplying Russia with said weapons when the country made it clear at the UN Security Council that they have taken no side in the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Yes, that's an interesting one. There's been a lot of comment about the government's standpoint on this. And of course, they are supposed to be non-aligned. And I would actually be quite surprised if Arms Corps were in a position to supply weapons, ammunition, or other support of any substance to Russia or any other country at the moment, as Arms Corps seem to have quite a few of their own problems. But they're not the only people in South Africa who manufacture weapons. There are at least 2 companies in Gauteng who do so. They, of course, are bound by the same international treaties and South African government restrictions with regard to the export of weapons. So there may be something that was done, and I think that our president has alluded to this as a possibility, that was done illegally by the companies who are established in South Africa, who are not directly controlled by Arms Corps. And there's one other aspect, of course, which is that in July 2021, when we had the riots, particularly in KZN, there was a consignment of about 1.2 million rounds of ammunition that just disappeared from Durban Harbour. Those were that was ammunition that was being imported by a private company because of the shortage from Arms Corps' supply, and we didn't hear any follow-up on that. So where did those 1.2 million rounds of ammunition go?
And Andy, while we're still on that point about the president saying that, of course, he's going to launch an investigation into whether or not there were weapons that were shipped off to Russia. I mean, what do you think this then says about us as a country, particularly in terms of our leadership, where you have a head of a state saying that he is not sure of whether or not such an action actually took place, and we can understand the severity of what the repercussions could be should there be, of course, revelations that indeed there were arms that were shipped off to Russia?
Well, one has to look at the evidence that we've got at hand at the moment. Obviously, the South African State Security Agency will have a lot more to say about this, and hopefully will give us some feedback through the Office of the President. But cargo vessels like the Lady R, the Russian cargo ship that was involved, they routinely dock at Cape Town's civilian harbour. But this vessel particularly docked at the military harbour in Simonstown. And it was a cargo vessel. It wasn't a military vessel either. It didn't have to be treated specially. So that on its own creates quite a suspicion, and at the time did create a fair amount of interest. If it was not a Denel-type shipment, in other words, a shipment which the South African government were directly linked to, there could be some kind of a cover-up, which hopefully the judge, the retired judge, which the president is going to appoint to investigate this, will go into without fear or favour, and that we, the public, will hear what actually took place in December last year.
Andy, thank you so much for your insight that this evening. That is security analyst as well as consultant, Mr. Andy Grudko.